Hello, welcome back. I got a break at charging my camcorder. I have started the uploads. Watch the early Danish evening news. So let's continue reading. I have to close. Yes, but I cannot remember all this. That's too many names and numbers. It's many hundreds of names and numbers. I cannot read it, and I cannot remember. But I like to read it anyway. Even I cannot remember all these names and numbers. But I like to read it. I have it on my Japan list a long time ago. The Empire of Japan. But I'm reading about aircraft right now. But I was reading about Japanese seaplanes, Japanese flying boats. They're making the world best flying boats. This Shinmaya U2. So this is why I read it today. Yes, my apartment is still 30 degrees hot.
Marquis Komura Jitaro. Komura became Minister for Foreign Affairs under First Katsura administration and signed the Boxer Protocol on behalf of Japan. Shortly afterward, advance units of the 5th Division departed for China, bringing Japanese strength to 3,800 personnel out of the 17,000 of Allied forces. 58. The commander of the 5th Division, Lieutenant General Yamaguchi Motomi, had taken operational control from Fukushima. Japanese troops were involved in the storming of Tianjin on July 14, 58, after which these consolidated and awaited the remainder of the 5th Division and other coalition reinforcements. By the time the siege of Legations was lifted on August 14, 1900, the Japanese force of 13,000 was the largest single contingent and made up about 40% of the approximately 33,000 strong Allied expeditionary force. 58. Japanese troops involved in the fighting hard acquitted themselves well, although a British military observer felt their aggressiveness, densely packed formations, and overwillingness to attack cost them excessive and disproportionate casualties. 59. For example, during the Tianjin fighting, the Japanese suffered more than half of the Allied casualties, 400 out of 730, but comprised less than 1/4, 3,800, of the force of 17,000. 59. Similarly at Beijing, the Japanese accounted for almost 2/3 of the losses, 280 of 453, even though they constituted slightly less than half of the assault force. 59. After the uprising, Japan and the Western countries signed the Boxer Protocol with China, which permitted them to station troops on Chinese soil to protect their citizens. After the treaty, Russia continued to occupy all of Manchuria. Russo-Japanese War. French illustration of a Japanese assault on entrenched Russian troops during the Russo-Japanese War. Japanese riflemen during the Russo-Japanese War. The Russo-Japanese War was a conflict for control of Korea and parts of Manchuria between the Russian Empire and Empire of Japan that took place from 1904 to 1905. The victory greatly raised Japan's stature in the world of global politics. 60. The war is marked by the Japanese opposition of Russian interests in Korea, Manchuria, and China, notably the Liaodong Peninsula, control by the city of Ryojun. Originally, in the Treaty of Shimonoseki, Ryojun had been given to Japan. This part of the treaty was overruled by Western powers, which gave the port to the Russian Empire, furthering Russian interests in the region. These interests came into conflict with Japanese interests. The war began with a surprise attack on the Russian Eastern Fleet stationed at Port Arthur, which was followed by the Battle of Port Arthur. Those elements that attempted escape were defeated by the Japanese Navy under Admiral Togo Higashio at the Battle of the Yellow Sea. Following a late start, the Russian Baltic Fleet was denied passage through the British-controlled Suez Canal. The fleet arrived on the scene a year later only to be annihilated in the Battle of Tsushima. While the ground war did not fare as poorly for the Russians, the Japanese forces were significantly more aggressive than their Russian counterparts and gained a political advantage that culminated with the Treaty of Portsmouth, negotiated in the United States by the American President Theodore Roosevelt. As a result, Russia lost the part of Count Tadasu Hayashi, vice resident minister to the United Kingdom. While living in London from 1900, he worked to successfully conclude the Anglo-Japanese alliance and signed on behalf of the government of Japan on January 30, 1902. Port Arthur, as viewed from the top of Gold Hill, after its capitulation in 1905. From left to right are figures of the Russian battleships Peresvet, Poltava, Retvizn Pobeda and the protected cruiser Pallada. Sakhalin Island south of 50 degrees north latitude, which became Karafuto Prefecture, as well as many mineral rights in Manchuria. In addition, Russia's defeat cleared a way for Japan to annex Korea outright in 1910. Annexation of Korea. In the late 19th and early 20th centuries, various Western countries actively competed for influence, trade, and territory in East Asia, and Japan sought to join these modern colonial powers. The newly modernized Meiji government of Japan turned to Korea, under Joseon dynasty, then in the sphere of influence of China's Qing dynasty. The Japanese government initially sought to separate Korea from Qing and make Korea a Japanese satellite in order to further their security and national interests. 61. In January 1876, following the Meiji Restoration, Japan employed gunboat diplomacy to pressure the Joseon dynasty into signing the Japan-Korea Treaty of 1876, which granted extraterritorial rights to Japanese citizens and opened 3 Korean ports to Japanese trade. The rights granted to Japan under this unequal treaty, 62, were similar to those granted Western powers in Japan following the visit of Commodore Perry. 62. Japanese involvement in Korea increased during the 1890s, a period of political upheaval. Korea, under the Korean Empire, was de facto occupied and declared a Japanese protectorate following the Japan-Korea Treaty of 1905. After proclaimed the founding of the Korean Empire, Korea was officially annexed in Japan through the Annexation Treaty in 1910. In Korea, the period is usually described as the time of Japanese forced occupation, Hangul, Iljangyongai, Hanja. Other terms include Japanese Imperial Period, Hangul, Ilj-Side, Hanja, or Japanese Administration, Hangul, Wajian, Hanja. In Japan, a more common description is the Korea of Japanese rule, Nippon Chijidai no Kusen. The Korean peninsula was officially part of the Empire of Japan for 35 years, from August 29, 1910, until the formal Japanese rule ended, de jure, on the 2nd of September, 1945, upon the surrender of Japan in World War II. The 1905 and 1910 treaties were eventually declared null and void by both Japan and South Korea in 1965. Taishira, 1912-1926. World War I. Japan entered World War I on the side of the Allies in 1914, seizing the opportunity of Germany's distraction with the European war to expand its sphere of influence in China and the Pacific. Japan declared war on Germany on the 23rd of August, 1914. Japanese and Allied British Empire forces soon moved to occupy Tsingtao Fortress, the German East Asia Squadron base, German leased territories in China's Emperor Taisho, the 123rd Emperor of Japan topographic map of the Empire of Japan in November 1918 Shandong Province as well as the Marianas, Caroline, and Marshall Islands in the Pacific, which were a part of German New Guinea. Swift invasion in the German territory of the Kiautku Bay Concession and the siege of Tsingtao proved successful. The German colonial troops surrendered on the 7th of November, 1914, and Japan gained the German holdings. In 1920, the League of Nations established the South Seas Mandate under Japanese administration to replace German New Guinea. Native Micronesian constables of Truk Island circa 1930. Truk became a possession of the Empire of Japan under a mandate from the League of Nations following Germany's defeat in World War I. With its Western allies, notably the United Kingdom, heavily involved in the war in Europe, Japan dispatched a naval fleet off Mediterranean Sea to aid Allied shipping. Japan sought further to consolidate its position in China by presenting the 21 demands to China in January 1915. In the face of slow negotiations with the Chinese government, widespread anti-Japanese sentiment in China, and international condemnation, Japan withdrew the final group of demands, and treaties were signed in May 1915. The Anglo-Japanese alliance was renewed and expanded in scope twice, in 1905 and 1911, before its demise in 1921. It was officially terminated in 1923. Siberian intervention. After the fall of the Tsarist regime and the later provisional regime in 1917, the new Bolshevik government signed a separate peace treaty with Germany. After this, various factions that succeeded the Russian Empire fought amongst themselves in a multi-sided civil war. In July 1918, President Wilson asked the Japanese government to supply 7,000 troops as part of an international coalition of 25,000 troops planned to support the American Expeditionary Force Siberia. Prime Minister Trokimeza agreed to send 12,000 troops but under the Japanese command rather than as part of an international coalition. The Japanese had several hidden motives for the venture, which included an intense hostility and fear of communism, a determination to recoup historical losses to Russia, and the desire to settle the northern problem in Japan's security, either through the creation of a buffer state or through outright territorial acquisition. By November 1918, more than 70,000 Japanese troops under Chief of Staff Uematsu had occupied all ports and major towns in the Russian maritime provinces and eastern Siberia. Japan received 765 Polish orphans from Siberia. 63-64, in June 1920, around 450 Japanese civilians and 350 Japanese soldiers, along with Russian White Army supporters, were massacred by partisan forces associated with the Red Army at Nikolaevsk on the Amur River. The United States and its allied coalition partners consequently withdrew from Vladivostok after the capture and execution of White Army leader Admiral Alexander Kolchak by the Red Army. However, the Japanese decided to stay, primarily due to fears of the spread of communism so close to Japan and commanding officers and chiefs of staff of the Allied military mission to Siberia, Vladivostok. During the Allied intervention, Japanese controlled Korea and Manchuria. The Japanese army provided military support to the Japanese-backed Provisional Priamurye government based in Vladivostok against the Moscow-backed Far Eastern Republic. The continued Japanese presence concerned the United States, which suspected that Japan had territorial designs on Siberia and the Russian Far East. Subjected to intense diplomatic pressure by the United States and United Kingdom, and facing increasing domestic opposition due to the economic and human cost, the administration of Prime Minister Katamasava withdrew the Japanese forces in October 1922. Japanese casualties from the expedition were 5,000 dead from combat or illness, with the expedition costing over 900 million yen. Groundbreaking ceremony of the Ginza Line.